For coming to our discussion on high-speed DC fast charging for electric vehicles. My name is Tom Malogany. I'm a senior editor for the electric vehicle news site Inside EVs. I'm also the host and creator of a YouTube channel called State of Charge that's dedicated to electric vehicle charging. I'd like to thank the New York Power Authority for hosting this event today. We have a great panel of 5 individuals that all have unique perspectives on the DC fast charging industry. The way we're going to do this today is I'm going to allow each one of the panelists to talk a little bit about what they're doing, introduce themselves, talk about some of the challenges, let you know if they have any news that they want to announce. And then I'm going to follow up and ask each one of the panelists a question that I have already arranged. Once we do that, I'm going to turn the questions over to you guys, the audience. I'm going to pick people to ask questions, and I ask you to hold your questions until that point. We're going to let the panelists talk about what they're doing, and I'm going to ask some questions first. There should be plenty of time at the end to ask your own questions. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to John. Please introduce yourself.
Thanks, Tom. Good morning, everyone. So, my name is John Markowitz, Senior Director of E-Mobility at New York Power Authority. We're state-owned electric utility here, and we have been active in the electric transportation space for 20 years. Originally got involved in it helping other state and local governments electrify their fleets. So we would do everything from installing chargers at municipal parking lots on their behalf, all the way up to wiring up transit bus depots with high-speed charging for electric transit buses. More recently, we opened up a new program called Evolve New York. We realized that the state had very ambitious climate goals, and we really needed to get the electrification of transportation really aggressively moving forward. And what was lacking in New York State, especially upstate, was a network of DC fast chargers to serve vehicles. So you can easily travel from Long Island to Buffalo in any brand EV. So that was just a big gap in the market. So we started this program, Evolve New York. Currently, we're at 122 fast chargers at 32 sites. We're still rolling out new sites. And by fast charging, we mean fast. It's all 150, 350 kilowatts. That would basically allow you with one of the newer EVs to plug in, 20 minutes later, car's full again, you continue your ride. So basically in the time it takes to eat lunch, you're ready to move on. So that's been the big goal with our program, and we're here at the car show. We have our booth showing a typical charger of ours, and just providing the public information that you can road trip in an EV in New York State. Thanks, and I'll hand it over to Adam.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Adam Reuter. I lead the Clean Transportation team at NYPA, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority. We work very closely with NYPA and our other sister agencies, but also the industry in advancing electric vehicles in the state. We run electric vehicle rebate programs for cars and trucks and buses in the state, and as well as charging stations, both level 2 charging stations and fast chargers. So really excited to be here this morning, and I'll say a little bit more about what we're doing in a little bit.
Great. Hi, everyone. My name is Aaron Young. I'm the Senior Manager of Commercial Networks and Fleets at Electrify America. And my focus is really working with third parties to deploy networks that they own and operate, and we white label. I'll talk about more of what Electrify America is doing broadly and how I fit into that piece, but excited to be here to talk to everyone.
Hello, my name is Matt Teske, and I'm the founder and CEO of ChargeWay. And ChargeWay is a software platform for drivers and industry to simplify how EV charging works. We're going to have a conversation today about DC fast charging, and a lot of that is brand new to the public. And so our platform is designed to simplify that for every driver and everyone around the country, really to make it approachable for understanding how charging fits into your life based on the car that you choose. And we're currently operating throughout the country, and really excited to be here today with the team from NYPA and taking part in the New York Auto Show, and really helping to explain the value of their Evolve New York fast charging network, and looking to just discuss more deeply about how we can help simplify how we communicate to the public how EV charging and how electricity as a fuel is easy. And that's our goal at ChargeWay. John?
Thank you. So I'm John Thomas. I'm the COO of Autel Energy. We're a EV charging OEM. At the end of the day, we're a global company. We actually have our home office here on Long Island, New York, and Port Washington. So this is a home game for us. We basically do everything from home charging all the way through to high power charging, which we're going to talk a lot about today. And I think what we bring to the market as a differentiator is we've been in the automotive business for nearly 2 decades. So we really understand that at the end of the day, this device has to work in concert with the car, has to have high reliability and quality, and that's what Autel does really well and brings to the market here. So we're going to talk about a lot of exciting stuff today, and all these gentlemen are our partners to make that happen. At the end of the day, we got to work with everybody in concert. So thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thank you, John, and thank you, everybody. So now I'm going to follow up, and I'm going to ask each one, talk a little bit about some of the challenges that they have in their position, as well as if you have any news that you're announcing here at the show. And once you do that, I'm going to follow up with a question. So let's talk a little bit about challenges, John.
Yeah, building DC fast chargers, for the general public, was a lot harder once we started doing it than we thought going in. You have to first get the real estate set up. So you have to find a willing partner who's willing to give you a certain number of parking spaces. It has to have room for the power equipment, all that. So that took longer than anybody would have expected. Then, once you get into construction, a lot of our construction happened during the pandemic. So all the supply chain shortages and all of that came into place. Not so much with the chargers, but the equipment downstream of it. But one thing that we've had in New York that's been a huge success is once we knew we were building out the fast charging network, we worked closely with all our sister utilities and really built a system to enable everybody to team up and work on DC fast charging. Everything from like getting the grid upgrades in place, mapping out the whole state so you knew, okay, here's a good place to put DC fast charging, here's a terrible place to put it. So avoid this exit, maybe go one exit further north, that kind of thing. So those are some of the challenges we experienced up front.
Aaron probably shares some of those challenges with you, but we'll get to Aaron in a minute. So, John, I'm actually going to follow up and do the question now.
Okay.
I think that format's going to work well. So, you talked a little bit about challenges of getting them in the ground. Okay, now they're in the ground. Do you visit these sites? Do you check social media? Do you monitor what your users are saying about the sites and fix them when they're broken? That seems to be a growing issue. I'll add my 2 cents. I've used the Evolve New York network quite a few times. I live in northern New Jersey, and I've never had a problem. It's been fantastic driving up to upstate New York and Canada. So thank you very much for putting that in. I couldn't make it to those destinations without Evolve New York, so thank you. But talk a little bit about your follow-up.
Sure, and yeah, that's a huge part of it, and we've staffed up really to address the operations side of this. So we start all the way from like the original purchase order in building in some reliability. So we require our vendors to regularly inspect the sites, do a visual inspection, so if any cables are broken, anything, a trouble ticket gets written, right? But we also do monitor all the social media platforms as well. So if a user complains, cable's broken or something, okay, we issue a trouble ticket right away. We also require that they have technicians and spare parts locally to New York. Because one thing we learned early on in the charging business doing this was, if you have to have parts flown in from another part of the world, okay, you're going to lose days or even weeks, right? So you can't have that. Like if there's a trouble ticket, we need responses like within hours or days at the most, even if it's a remote site. And what's amazing that you said it's a real testimonial to the program is there were parts of the state that were just missing DC fast chargers, right? So one being the Northway, right? So driving up to Quebec from here was impossible before our program. So we put those dots on the map on that road. 17 is a similar road going east and west across the state. So I'm really glad to hear it. But yeah, we take the reliability part seriously because DC fast chargers, if anybody, it's almost a negative instead of a positive.
It absolutely is a negative if you pull up expecting to be able to charge and you can't. It's worse than not making the trip. So anyway, Adam, let's talk a little bit about what are the challenges that you face?
Sure. So New York State has made a huge amount of progress on electric vehicle adoption, both from the vehicles and the charging standpoint, over the last 10 years plus that we've been working on this. New York is very close to 150,000 electric vehicles on the road, which, when you look at about a third of those were purchased just in the last year. The market is accelerating dramatically, and we were around 7% market share for electric vehicles in the fourth quarter of last year, compared to maybe 3 years ago, we were down 1 to 2%. Sales are growing rapidly. Number of vehicles on the road are growing rapidly. We're expanding charging to meet that as well. We're up to about 12,000 public and workplace charging stations across the state, a combination of level 2 and fast charging. So this is continuing to grow. The one big challenge, and I think it's particularly relevant to folks in New York City, is the challenge of charging at home, especially for apartment dwellers, folks who don't have their own single-family homes and dedicated parking garage or driveway to park in. New York has more people like that in that situation than any other state, and it's something that we are actively working on trying to resolve. And it's a combination of fast charging and level 2 charging, and we are working not just NYSERDA, but with the other state agencies. The Department of Public Service and the Public Service Commission has authorized the utilities to spend a lot of money in this space. The Department of Transportation is the lead agency for the National EV Infrastructure Program. That's a federally funded program through the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, and that's working to install fast charging across the state on many of these corridors as well. But and then NYSERDA has our programs as well, and I'm happy to talk about those a little bit more too.
Yeah, so you kind of answered my question. I was going to talk about the challenges of charging when you don't live in a single-family home or you don't have control of your electric supply. It's real easy to own an EV if you live in a private home and you can plug in your garage. It becomes infinitely more difficult when you can't charge at home. And there's public charging infrastructure, and we're scaling up, but the truth of the matter is, it becomes, you can make it work, but you have to make it work. It's not as easy as just coming home and plugging in. Does the state have any programs to assist apartment dwellers that where they need to figure out a way to charge?
Yes. So right now, charging stations in multifamily buildings can receive some of the costs covered by the electric utilities. NYSERDA has had a program for level 2 charging stations at workplaces and multifamily buildings, 2 key areas where we see having charging as really being critical to encouraging people to make that purchase decision and go ahead and buy an EV. If you can charge at a place where you're going to be every day for a number of hours, that makes a huge difference in your purchase decisions. We are hoping to have a new program in that space soon, but that will be in the future. So this is a topic of great importance to us. Great need for collaboration on this front. There's a lot that can be done by the municipality, by the city, on building codes. New York City has been really aggressive on that, and other cities can follow suit too.
Very good, thank you. Aaron, so how does Electrify America deal with scaling up their network on a state-by-state basis? I know there's different rules, there's different utilities, there's thousands of different utilities. They all have their different rules and regulations. I know when Electrify America first started, I had the opportunity to interview many people there. It was, the utility interconnect was different everywhere you went. Sometimes it took months to get the permits. Now that you guys have been doing this for a few years, has that improved? Have you figured out a way to shorten that time to get the chargers in the ground and up faster? Maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, certainly. And you know, to give some context around Electrify America, you know, our mission is to advance zero-emission vehicle infrastructure or zero-emission vehicle adoption through infrastructure, education, and awareness. So, you know, everything we do is really paramount to building that infrastructure out there. And we're doing that through 4 main business units. So Electrify America, which is the owned and operated network, which in just 5 years we were able to build 800 locations, 3,500 chargers in 47 states plus DC. So ramping that up really quickly in just 5 years. We've also expanded that to Electrify Canada. So we have 32 locations there, nearly 100 chargers. And then we also opened up another business unit of Electrify Home. So making sure there's a home charging solution so we can be, you know, touching customers at the full kind of life cycle of charging. And then the commercial business unit, which I lead, is working with third parties like NYPA, who want to build out infrastructure with their capital. So we've really done a lot of work to understand those challenges. And I think like you said, like the adoption of EVs is increasing. I think, you know, a third of the EVs on the road in New York are electric and are from the last year. And what we've seen on our network is about 6 million charging sessions on our network last year, which was 5 times more than the year before that, and about 20 times more than 2 years prior to that. So we've seen a huge increase in adoption, a huge increase in usage of our stations, and so that means we also need to bring the infrastructure, and so that's really the challenge. And so the way we look at meeting that is we're trying to really support others who want to invest capital into this space by basically in the 5 years of ramping up our network and dealing with more than 200 utilities across the country, who many of them had not interacted with a DC fast charger before. You're bringing in as much power as, in some cases, you know, a data center, but you're doing it in a couple of weeks. And so what we do is we make single points of contact with utilities. We've helped them to streamline processes across the country, and working with permitting agencies as well. So we've helped them kind of refine their processes because, you know, 5 years ago, it was in many cases the first time these folks had seen a DC fast charger. And so we've done a lot of work in enabling that. And then now what we're trying to do is really work with other players in the market to help them kind of advance on that learning curve and work with folks like NYPA and others who are building networks so that we can bring our expertise to really help them do that as well.
Great, thank you. So Matt, what you and I do have a lot of overlap with helping the public better understand electric vehicles and electric vehicle charging. And you know, as we all know, it's very easy to get gasoline. Everybody knows how to do it. You've been doing it your whole life. It's very simple. Charging EVs isn't as simple. There's so many different levels of charging. There's different power levels. Even the cars themselves accept different amounts of power, and they accept different amounts of power depending on how warm or cold the battery is. It's very complicated. So it's daunting for new electric vehicle owners to make that switch because they're looking at something that they might not like getting gasoline, but they know how to do it and it's easy and your life is busy, and do you really want to spend a month learning this whole new process? I've done that over the years. I've learned it. Some of the EV, advocates and aficionados have spent many hours of their lives studying this, learning how chargers work and everything. But the average person does not want to do that, and they shouldn't have to do that to refuel their vehicle. So what you're trying to do is teach people how this all works really easily. And I'm still. The jury is still out in my mind on whether you can do that because there's so much to learn. Can you teach people simply, can you organize the terminology and let people look at your app and figure out charging without forcing them to do weeks of research like I had to figure out different power levels, 800 volt systems, 400 volt systems, 48 amp chargers, and all that stuff? Can you do this?
Well, I think you just set the stage for why ChargeWay is valuable. No, but I think so. And I think you just have to think about what we're talking about, which is consumer education and talking about consumer behavior and just how we all operate and think. Anytime you have something you've done for a long time, if you're going to switch to doing something that provides you the same utility, if we're talking about fuel, you have to bring to that conversation a way that matches the experience of what someone has done. So if buying gasoline is as simple as remembering the word regular, That's the competitive landscape for how we need to be communicating. But to your description, there are so many complicated elements that go into charging that we have to be thoughtful about on behalf of the public. We have industry experts up here, all of us working on different facets of how to make charging possible. But just because the technology is possible doesn't necessarily mean it's going to translate to the public. You have to hand it to them in a way that they understand how it meets them where they are. And so for example, just think about, talking about level 2 and fast charging. We often use these terminologies in the industry. But with regard to fast charging, it's not just always fast. There are different levels of fast charging. And so considering that, that's what ChargeWay was designed to really help someone visualize. Because that's the other thing is gas stations are very obvious. You can see them from a mile away with a large sign on the highway. Charging stations, there is no signage. There is no tall sign that allows someone to see it from a distance. You have to know where it is to find it. And once you find it, you have to know it works for your car. And by works for your car, that means the plug types. We haven't mentioned that there's 4 physical plug types in America yet today. And that's something that everyone will have to navigate. So our platform was designed to say, okay, do we try to educate them on the engineering terminology? I think it's smarter if we bring people to that conversation in a way that at a high level they understand what they need to know, which is you select your vehicle. And once you've chosen your vehicle, your ownership experience, we can then say, this is the plug color you use. And make it simple. We don't necessarily need to educate people on the names of the plugs as much as they need to know it works for them. And colors can be translated into multiple languages. And then the next step, to your point about cars accept different power, stations offer different power, is using a simple number system, which is what we do with ChargeWay, to differentiate power levels, whether we're talking about charging at home or away from home. I think it's important to give people information that is easy at a high level, that's built on the engineering, that allows them, if they want to, they can dig down into the details if they need, but at face value, what do they want to know as a driver? Most people that are outside of our bubble are going to want to know, how does it work for me? And as you said, if someone's at home they can charge, that is a very different experience from someone who doesn't have a house where they can fill up. So helping people navigate that landscape is fundamental to success for everybody sitting here in the industry as well. And I think that what we offer through ChargeWay is it's a personalized way to navigate that, and it represents everyone from the industry well, whether we're talking about networks or automotive brands or even utility partners that we work with. And that's the goal, is helping someone know how it fits into their world. So I do think it's possible, and we've been working very hard on it from our side, and I think our solution can be translated to others that need to have that same help.
That's great. And Matt has one of his ChargeWay beacons on display right behind us. So if anybody's interested in seeing how the ChargeWay system works, Matt's going to be hanging around, as will all the panelists. We're going to be hanging around after this if you have any additional questions. And I'm sure Matt would love to give you a demonstration on how the ChargeWay can help you better understand charging. Okay, next up, John. John, why don't you talk a little bit about challenges that you have, and if you have any announcements here at the show?
Sure. So first of all, let's all take a deep breath. It's going to be okay. This is a really interesting and transformational time for everybody, right? And we're talking about a lot of different elements of this transformation. And being a manufacturer of the product, the actual chargers themselves, if you go out there, you read a lot in the marketplace, you hear about the problems, the issues. We're all getting through this, right? I live in California, so don't hold that against me. I'm a Midwester. But it's a whole different game out there, right? So 5 years ago, I bought an EV because I was running an EV charging company. I said, I'm going to put my mouth where my money is. And what I found out is it's not that hard, right? At the end of the day, what you really find out is there's chargers around. There is ways to get it. It's much different here, right? It's growing here. In California, it's a little bit different game. We're ahead of the curve from the rest of the United States. But we're going to catch up. The most important thing at the end of the day, as we talk through this, right, it starts with the utility and having available, adequate, efficient power. It goes through to installation. It goes through to the hardware. And I always say the hardware underpins everything. If the hardware doesn't work, the rest of it doesn't matter. So when we look at our hardware, we're not aiming for this 97%, right? If your cell phone didn't work 3% of the time, you wouldn't be a very happy camper at the end of the day. So at the end of the day, we're aiming for 100%. We're somewhere around 98, if our company is right now, but we're bringing the bar up and up and up because we know our customers, our partners, and you as consumers need 100% reliability and quality. So, when we look at this, we're looking, the end game is these things have to be working just like a gas pump, up all the time. And that's really the mantra, I think, of everybody in this group here, is to get the whole system working adequately. The nice thing is, from a government perspective, we're now starting to really look at this and really starting to deploy, right, on a mass scale. But that requires, the next challenge is capacity in the system, right? There's a lot of charging companies out there today. There's plenty for everybody. In fact, there's too much for everybody if we start to deploy on a major scale. So things like state-siding manufacturing, which is something we're doing, as well as some of the other people in the industry, really bringing the product to where the problem is, right? Bringing solutions, not more problems in this discussion.
That's great. So, quick question. I've talked to a lot of different network operators as well as equipment manufacturers like yourself, and the supply chain issues that we've had over the past couple of years seem to have really hurt a lot of companies. They weren't able to meet deadlines. The chargers weren't in the ground when they were promised. How's Autel dealing with supply chain constraints? Do you have supply chain constraints at this moment? And do you see a light at the end of the tunnel?
Okay, that's a fantastic question. So I agree with you. We learned a lot through the pandemic, right, about supply chain and issues with supply chain. And you know, this industry, just like all the other industries, has suffered from those supply chain issues. I think one of the things, Tom, we do to address that directly is we're vertically integrated. So we make our own electronics boards, our own PCBAs, and that doesn't put us in a position where we're waiting in line for somebody else to build something else. So if you're building electronic components today, a lot of times you go to a contract manufacturer who builds computers one day, they build transformers another day, and they build chargers another day. And right now in the charging game, we're at a small volume, right? So you wait in line behind everybody else. So other people get those microchips before you do or whatever. So at Autel, we've taken a very strong position. We've done it for the last 2 decades. We build our own stuff. We engineer and test and design and develop our own stuff. So that's really helped us to address that problem and make sure we have capacity. We're also a little bit fortunate. We started in the US last year in September. So we have a lot of available capacity out there to fill the market. But we believe the right thing is to bring that capacity here, really get it state-sided, and really have it available.
That's great. Thank you. So now we're going to open up some questions to the audience. I see right on the end, John. Could we get a mic down there, or should I hand you mine?
Hi, John Volker, car and driver, and a few other outlets. We've now had fast charging for Tesla drivers for about 10 years. Leaf drivers had slow fast charging for almost the same period. And yet, EV adoption data from the first quarter shows that Tesla is actually expanding its lead in terms of number of charging cables out there. They have half the cars on the road, roughly, but they have about twice the number of cables compared to anyone else. So 2 questions. Number 1, does that regularize so the rest of us who don't necessarily drive Teslas have an equal shot? And number 2, I wrote a lot of articles saying, well, it's early years and the reliability will get better. It's been 5 years. The reliability, if anything, of the non-Tesla networks is getting worse. And I am starting to see people who are saying, I'm turning back my EV after a 3-year lease and I can't get another one because I can't rely on DC fast charging. Love to hear from any of the panelists about this.
All right, that's a tough question. No hands are being raised. Well, I'll have to assign it if anybody doesn't want to grab that. Maybe John, maybe even Aaron a little bit.
Kick it off. I think it's me and Aaron, basically. So yeah, the reliability thing is key, and the whole industry is looking at it. And you know, it's good that folks in the press are talking about it, and I guess just bringing the issue to the forefront, right? But you're right. I mean, you need a lot of DC fast charging points all over, right, on every interstate to make people want to own an EV. And I think, Tesla went out, proactively and did this at their own expense. And I think the rest of the auto industry is realizing, like, okay, that was strategically a good call at the time. Right, and in Europe, I know like a lot of the automakers invested in building out DC fast charging networks, and maybe that'll happen here in the States. But at least the federal government now is doing that, so I'm hoping it's going to expand. But The key thing on the reliability side, I think, is that, the contracts have to be written in such a way that it's designed in to the program, right? Like the stuff I was saying about, like, having local technicians and all that, and regular inspections. It definitely has to be part of the answer to it.
Yeah, I mean, I echo what John's saying. I think, we've come a long way in the 5 years at Electrify America, building out our network. We've invested hundreds of millions of dollars in our chargers. We're now in our 4th generation of equipment. And we've really tried to take a lot of our operational learnings from the first 5 years of operations into the design of our next generation of equipment to make it more reliable, more serviceable. And so we're actually actively out there replacing or upgrading some of our earlier equipment with the newer equipment and continuing to just expand the capabilities of our existing chargers. I do think, like John said, and like we're seeing on the utilization of our network, that a lot more infrastructure needs to be built out there. We're looking at building, bigger locations, so there's, more redundancy at the site, so that there's less chance of queuing. And so a lot of it is going bigger and growing and continuing to learn from the lessons that we've had over the last couple of years and the experience to make it a better experience to customers. Because at the end of the day, that's what our focus is on trying to get customers on the road and to have a good experience. And that's, what makes our business thrive. So it's really what our focus is.
I think one thing I would add to that is that, as you described, Tesla's lead that they have, the ecosystem that they built is a closed ecosystem. They control it end to end, and it simplifies what they can build out. And I think even what they've done with their charging infrastructure is all the thinking and representation of what is happening with the charging experience is represented inside the vehicle. There's nothing that's represented on the station itself, so that removes elements that can basically have problems and break. So I think that's an example of where their lead is at, and based on the fact that every other player, whether we're talking OEMs or networks, are collaborating on making that type of an experience better, I don't know necessarily if they can quickly match that, because that's a lot of organization around how the experience would look, both from the vehicle and the network side. And right now, as we've seen, it's very Wild West in a sense for what different networks might be doing with their hardware. And the automakers have to align with that as best they can. And so from an ownership perspective, I mean, Tesla did own it. And so I think that, is it hard to catch that? I think so. But I think we're seeing improvements. I mean, to your point, reliability is still an issue, but there are improvements being made and learnings from what did go wrong, screens being improved, things of that nature on new hardware. So that is a start. But we're at the beginning of this conversation in a lot of ways, and Tesla just is ahead of it. So.
And I want to follow up on one quick point, John, about that. As you know, I've been covering the industry as you have for quite some time, and I can remember so many of the OEMs saying that Tesla was crazy to do this and that the investment was going to bankrupt the company. It did the exact opposite, and which, and nobody back 10 years ago was telling us that that's a good move on Tesla's part, and you can attest to that. So anyway, next, right up front row.
Hi, my name's Craig Van Battenberg. I'm out of Massachusetts. Aiden and I work at a company that trains technicians on how to work on electric vehicles in the aftermarket. But I got involved with a volunteer group with the Department of Energy about 9 months ago, and I can share this with you. There's a pilot program in Virginia to get high school students trained in automotive, but also into the wiring of this building. And when they graduate, they'll be hired by one of you on graduation to get trained on your charging system to get out on the road immediately so they can start fixing and repairing the broken ones. So if you don't know about that, if you want to get in touch with me, I ask permission, share it with anybody you want. But the question I have for you, we have a Tesla in our fleet, we have a Volt, we have a Leaf, we have a Nero, all EVs. When I want to go somewhere and I want to get there and I don't know where I'm going, I have to take the Tesla. It's the only thing that's going to be reliable enough, and I don't like it, the car itself, but also I'd rather drive the Nero. But I can't, because too many times we're getting there, we're stuck. Now, Biden said we need to get this fixed. So what's happening politically? What's happening in Washington to make all of you get along and start working together so we don't have to wait 5 more years? Which is my guess. We're 5 years away from getting a program together that's going to equal Tesla. Any ideas up there if the administration, Department of Energy, is going to help you get it done? Is anybody sitting you down and saying, look, we're going to have one system, get it together? Is that happening?
So I can't speak for I can't speak for the feds. We're New York State, but the federal government recently has issued the technical standards for the $5 billion that they're putting out to all of the states to build out this charging network. It touches on all different aspects of what the hardware needs to be able to do, how it is operating, and what the process is going to look like for spending that money. And so all of the states are digesting that and incorporating that into how we're operating, especially with this money. But I think the federal government having those technical standards out there filters down into other programs, and NYSERDA's programs have been working closely with the federal programs on things like EPA Energy Star, on data collection standards, on the hardware standards as well. That each one helps to bring a little bit more continuity across states and really for drivers. The one thing that I would just add about what we can be doing to really get to the point where the Tesla network is that so much of getting EV charging built, especially DC fast charging, is about usage. Having more EVs on the road makes the business case for installing these much better. Usage is key. Without that, you're gonna either not have private partners like this who are willing to invest and build out the network, or you're gonna build out a bunch of stations that sit there collecting cobwebs. So getting the cars on the road is really important, and that's what that's the other element of this that we're pushing for. In the last year, we've seen the market share for non-Tesla automakers growing quite significantly. Tesla is still doing really well, but the other automakers, as you'll see walking around this show, are bringing more and more compelling models to market. The more of those are on the road, the better business case all of the folks up here who are operating charging stations will see, and the more they're going to be able to invest, and that's going to really help the whole market.
And just adding on to what Adam said, I think with the federal program to subsidize DC fast charging, like two remarkable things I think were included. One is that there is an uptime standard that will become the de facto industry standard. So that was a step forward. I think also having funding for the operations and maintenance of the chargers after they're funded was a key gap that just about every government program before that did not fund that part and funded the capital. And then eventually people would sort of walk away from these things, which was one of the initial reasons for low reliability. So I think the feds are trying to address those issues.
The one thing I'd add to totally echo what John and Adam had explained. I think it's also important to understand how much progress the fast charging market has made outside of the open standard. 5 years ago, the public fast chargers that were out there were 50 kilowatts. And so now you can actually have a coast-to-coast network of 150, 350 kilowatt chargers. And I think the one thing that is really exciting about the NEVI program, the federal funding, is that they've helped establish that as a national standard. So for all of the stations that are going to be funded by these programs, it has to have a minimum of 450 kilowatt chargers. So the standards and the other reliability components are really important, but it's also important that that level of service is expected to be a certain level. We haven't seen that in grant programs before, where they've been done at a state level, and different states have thought differently about it. And so now at least we have a standard where consistently across the board, everybody thinks about public DC fast charging, ultra fast charging really being 150 kilowatts and above. And I think that's really great progress we've made over the last couple of years.
And one more thing I'd like to add to this. So I've been both in front of the Fed and some of the state agencies, right? And we're not having these similar discussions in Europe and Asia. They're just doing it, right? We've made this into a political issue for our country, and it's not in the best interest of our people and our country. So we need to put all that aside and take what now has been basically just set into motion by the government and implement, right? If we don't do that and we spend all this time in consternation and talking about it, it'll never get done. Because if you leave it up to the private sector at the end of the day, they're not going to do it because it's a monetary thing, right? So now we had to enforce it. We had to push it. And I think it's the best thing that happened for this whole topic and this whole environment. So, thank you.
Thank you, John. On this end here? We'll give you a mic.
Within Lemon with Advantastar. I think one of the big divides is that when you think about or see electric cars parked, they're always parked in a two-car garage in a family suburb plugged into a wall charger. I have a friend who has a Chevy Volt, and he's in an apartment complex. They won't let him plug it in through his balcony. They've got one charger on the property, and it actually costs him less to fill up with premium gas to drive it every day. Obviously, here in Manhattan, you got street parking coming out and everything's lined up on the street, whether you have an apartment and you move it across the street. I don't know if that's a thing anymore, or if you find a spot. Now, I know every corner or so there's a fire hydrant. On all four parts of every corner, there's one of those little ridged things to let people in wheelchairs and with canes know where the corner is to go down. And so I'm wondering what kind of program, what kind of ideas, what kind of thing coming down the pike will there be so that, I mean, obviously the perfect thing would be you park your car and inductive charging would automatically take place through Bluetooth, but what kind of plans are there, at least for the near term, to be able to allow people that park in those types of situations to just plug in all the time? Because a lot of people don't have the time to go to a special station where they can fast charge. Otherwise, you've taken away the main advantage that the electric cars promise, which is you don't have to go somewhere and sit around and pump gas or pump electrons. You can just do it when you're home or parked.
Good question with them. And,
Yeah,
and
I
I was
could-
just recently in the Netherlands, and I noticed there's a lot of on-street parking. They're like parking meters, and for the people that lived in apartments, it seemed like it would be very simple to get your car charged. I'll hand it over to you, John.
I could start. So one of our partners is New York City Department of Transportation. And if you go to their website and look at their electric vehicle page, they have very ambitious goals about electrifying the parking spaces under their control. They operate about 6,000 parking spaces throughout all the boroughs. And I forget the exact targets, but there's 20% and 40%, I forget which years. But it's pretty aggressive number of parking spaces they want to electrify. And it's a mixture of both level 2 for, say, an apartment dweller to use if they use the municipal lot across the street from the building, all the way up to DC fast charging. And they have very aggressive goals also to get all the for-hire vehicles in the city, so all your taxis and Uber and all that, for them to electrify. So they're also very aggressively looking at how can we get more DC fast charging installed in the city that could serve those people as well as the apartment dwellers. So I think there's a solution to it. It's just going to take some real sweat to build all this stuff at those kind of parking spaces as well as on-street charging.
I would just add that that mix is really critical. Upstate, NYSERDA right now has a program for fast chargers in Buffalo, Rochester, Syracuse, which are, it's important to focus on some of the other mid-sized cities as well, not just New York City, because there are a lot of apartment dwellers there too, and we see having a on-street parking can work in certain places, but there are also a lot of places where you don't want, it can be really tough to do on-street parking, on-street charging. So having fast charging, having workplace charging, so maybe if you're driving, if you're driving to work, then you can charge there if not at home. All of these are part of the solution that we need to be looking at holistically.
one thing that comes to mind, and those in the EV industry, we probably see it and talk about it a lot, is that at the end of the day, we also need to be mindful of how we protect those parking spots for drivers that are driving EVs. And with vehicle ownership in America for the last X amount of decades, it has been first come, first serve, unless it was a particular spot like a handicap spot. And that was for the individual that had a need for that. But now we're talking about the vehicle need, and it's a little bit different. It's not just I want that spot, it's my car needs that spot. And there's going to be, from a behavioral change perspective and people respecting and honoring that, we're already seeing people that pull up in front of fast chargers that are very obviously there and just parking their car and walking away. And if we want to have that, that's at a grocery store parking lot. So we're talking about a really busy street in a major metropolitan area about how we would want to protect, how that would need to be managed. That's a heavy, heavy lift that we need to get a lot of people involved in how we would not only design a system around how we make that work for drivers, but also ensure that it actually is something that other drivers understand the benefit of for those drivers. I mean, that right there is a worthwhile argument, but then it's also how does the public respond to that saying, look, I don't have the opportunity to buy this particular vehicle yet. I was in a hurry, I made a mistake, and I just got dinged $350 because I don't have that car. This is a tough conversation in a lot of ways.
Thank you, Matt. So we're coming up to the end of the discussion, so I'm going to take the last question. I'm going to direct it at John. We're talking a lot about electric vehicle adoption. New York State has an aggressive climate goal of banning combustion vehicles, new car sales beyond 2035. All that's great, but will we have enough power? You're here representing the New York Power Authority. Can you produce enough power to power the whole state transitions to electric vehicles?
Yeah, and the short answer is yes. And really, the way to look at it is the state ban is 2035 is all new vehicle sales to be electric, which basically means in 2034, there's gas cars still being sold. And those cars are going to be on the road for maybe 15 years. So it's really 2050 where the gas car becomes like really a weird thing to see, right? So it's a very slow transition. I say it's very similar to central air conditioning, where you go back several decades and very few houses had it. Then all of a sudden, like over maybe a 20, 30-year period, every house had it. And from a utility planning point of view, utilities are very used to planning on multi-decade kinds of scales in terms of building new power plants and upgrading the power grid. So that's something utilities are very used to doing, like they did with the air conditioning. So it's really the additional amount of energy to electrify everything, like everything with wheels, is about 20-25% more energy, and that's going to occur over multiple decades. So it's very doable. Where the short-term pain is, where like some really clever solutions need to happen, is what I call like point sources, right, of power. So like when you're electrifying something like a bus depot, and all of a sudden you're going from something that looks like a warehouse to something that looks like a skyscraper from the electric utility's point of view. That's like a pain point, because like a transit agency is basically turning over their whole fleet on a regular basis, right? It's all very planned. So every year, maybe there's 5 to 10% of their vehicles are getting retired. A whole bunch of new vehicles are coming in, and what we call fast charging for our light duty vehicles, for a bus, that's just overnight charging. Same power levels, same kind of equipment, but it's overnight because the battery's enormous, right? So those are really the more particular problems. They're very like sort of hot spots on the map, but big picture, like just charging lots of people's cars overnight in garages is not like a major hurdle for the utility.
Okay, thanks. I think we're up against it with the time. Now, I want to thank everybody for coming out here today. I want to thank our panelists. I think this was a great discussion. As I mentioned earlier, the panelists are going to be sticking around for a while if you have individual questions. And additionally, we have Amelia Berman. She's the e-mobility outreach manager for Con Edison, and she can speak on behalf of the Con Edison Smart Charge New York program. I mentioned Matt has a ChargeWay beacon over there. John can show you the Evolve New York DC fast charging equipment. And we also have lunch right behind us at the New York Power Authority booth. So that should put smiles on your faces. And thanks again for coming. And I also want to thank the New York Power Authority for putting on this discussion panel. I think it's necessary. And thanks for all of you for attending.